if there are people who don't want to really coordinate with this system, they're not going to be very effective. They're just going to be off doing stuff, and that's going to be complicating everything that's going on, complicating any response effort. The other thing is, in a fire or in a situation where there's an evacuation that's necessary, there will often be people who there's people who are not ready for an evacuation, and the first thing they'll do is walk around the house in circles and say, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do? And then they'll start calling their neighbors, what do I do, what do I do? And then their neighbors go, what do I do, what do I do? And then they'll start, and it goes on from there. They may or may not evacuate themselves very well. But there will almost always be people who, no, I'm not evacuating, I'm going to stay and I'm going to fight for my house or whatever. And I don't know if those are if there's a Venn diagram where there's overlap of the people who just resist authority generally and people who want to stay home and evacuate and not evacuate and save their house from whatever comes.
Judi Clark is an Analyst and Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. She joins the Plutopia podcast this time as we do a deep dive into emergency response and ways we can be better prepared.
I'm very glad to see everybody here and to talk about a subject that I've been pretty interested in for a long time, though I have to say I've dipped into emergency preparedness conversations going back to the Southeast Asian tsunami. And it's a little bit odd that I, sitting in Texas, was involved in the response to the tsunami. But that happened because I was connected to some people through World Changing, which was a nonprofit that had a blog, the World Changing blog. And some of the other bloggers there created what was called the SEAEAT blog, SEAEAT. It was the East Asian Tsunami blog, I think. We were involved partly in trying to come up with resources, and they were trying to figure out how to get in touch with people. I mean, there was kind of a major wipeout there, and it was very difficult to contact people in that particular context. And of course, it was catastrophic, really. It had a catastrophic effect on the region. A lot of people died. And then some years later, some of the same people gathered, and several other people, a bunch of us who were kind of involved in technology, especially open source technology. When Hurricane Katrina happened, we started what was called the Katrina People Finder Project. And a guy named Kaping Yi developed a format called the People Finder Interchange format, a data format. And much of that project involved scraping data about people who were either looking for people or people who were trying to let people know where they were. And putting that all into a structured database using the People Finder interchange format. And we were pretty successful at that, at helping people find each other. One of the spinoffs from that was another thing called Shelter Finder. We found that shelters for people who had been cast far and wide by the hurricanes flooding, that a number of those people were showing up at shelters here and there, and sometimes the shelters were impermanent. So there was like a lot of movement around. So it helped to be able to track not just where people were, but where the actual shelters were, and whether a shelter that was there yesterday is still there today. So we did that quite a bit. We got into a lot of conversation then about something that's become fairly common now, which was emergency alerts via SMS. Several people were talking about how that could be managed. And I don't know exactly to what extent that fed into what ultimately later happened, but I'm sure all of you have got emergency alerts on your cell phones. It's a fairly common thing now.
Yeah, if they don't, then Warren Central Texas, the organization Warren Central Texas, uses something called Everbridge. And we can share a link with them so that if you want to know what's going on and what to do about it, you can sign up for these alerts.
Okay, let's see. That's Warren Central Texas.
Warren Central Texas. You want me to put it in the chat here?
I've found it and I am going to share it on the.
And John, I've known you since the emergencies that happened before the actual physical emergencies, which was early in EFF. And
Oh,
the
yeah.
work we were doing with EFF.
Those were the days.
So
When I originally invited you to join us on the podcast, I was thinking about discussing that a bit. I believe our first face-to-face meeting was at the big chapters chapters meeting. EFF had talked for some time about forming chapters and invited a bunch of us to meet at Georgia Tech and discuss how those chapters would work. But when we got there, they said, well, we've decided not to have chapters.
They were open to chapters. And then Mitch Ratcliffe and I and you and Ed Vilmetti, and there were a few others that started to say, well, if you want chapters, we want to do this with our chapter. And that's when EFF had to say, oh, let's rein this in.
Yeah, and that was happening quite a bit on an email group that John Quarterman had set up called, what was it? This Bang Group is my recollection. Some fights were kind of breaking out there, and there was a lot of contention. People had different ideas about what the chapters should be and how they should relate to EFF. And Jerry Berman, who had just come on board as new director, the director at the time had been Cliff Figallo, who was the late Cliff Figallo, who was a good friend of mine and who was at one time director at the Well, or co-director at the Well. And Cliff, they brought Cliff in because he understood community building, and they were going to do a big community building effort. But Jerry Berman, when he showed up, convinced them that they really needed to focus on going to Washington. And Jerry used to say, if you want to get people who are out in the States really effective, get them to bus themselves to Washington and show up at the offices of their legislators. So I don't know, what was your view of that, Judi, that meeting?
I think it was pivotal because a lot of us brought our community building experience into the meeting, and we had our own level of expertise with the work that we were doing locally and how that would, be able to work best with a little bit of, sort of the corporate level support, not really corporate, but, and so when we shared our ideas about what works, and EFF saw how chaotic that was, and I think they just freaked and just realized, oh, this is an Army advance.
Yeah, the thing I remember was them coming in from a retreat. They'd just been in a retreat, and they sort of all filed in, the members of the EFF board and the staff. And they said, well, we brought you all here to discuss forming chapters, but we have decided not to have chapters. But we will tell you how to build a network.
Yeah, you remember the chapters discussion happening before I remembered it happening. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we had been talking about it for a while, and I remember being on some phone calls with Jerry and Sherry Steele, who was working with him, and who later became director. And they were starting to express concern even before we had that meeting, that they weren't going to. Jerry really, I think he felt that he needed to have more control over the chapters than was obviously going to work, given everybody was feeling pretty autonomous, all the various organizations that were hoping to become chapters. And kind of the way they put it in the meeting was, well, we don't feel that we should ask you all to let us control you. We should just form a network, and we should network with each other and have a network of all these different organizations. That's the way I recall the meeting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and now here we are today with EFF doing its crazy, very successful work that they're doing, and not so much chapters.
Except for EFF Austin, which is still there.
Yeah.
Still jamming away. EFF Austin was formed to be an alpha chapter of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, i.e. initial chapter. Yeah. And that was because their first big case that got them a lot of publicity was here in Austin, the Steve Jackson Games case. And Steve was one of the people who strongly suggested that they build a chapters organization. And in that same conversation, convinced them that Austin would be a good first place to have a chapter. So we started building a chapter here, and we even incorporated it. We were all raring to go.
You did an awesome job, from the beginning, all over the years. You've always done an awesome job. So, cheers for that.
Well, we always appreciated every opportunity to throw big parties, and incidentally at those parties try to help people understand the issues that EFF was focused on. So anyway, that's how we met. And now, some years later, we've both gone through a lot of evolution, and now you are doing disaster preparedness.
Informally. I'm trying to change my field from all the work that I've done in the past to being an official emergency planning person. But I'm not really officially, so I'm here to be a cheerleader. And
you talked earlier about getting notification about an emergency situation, the various methods, and that's something really I've taken a lot of interest in since high school when I was working in our local radio station, and they had something called the Emergency Broadcast System that was replacing Conelrad, which was a government thing that was going to take over the radios and TVs and give you emergency advice and orders. And these things have evolved a lot. There have been numerous things. And I noticed you're a ham radio operator, and they have done some of the finest emergency notification and emergency action. Can you talk about the various ways that people get notified that there is actually an emergency?
You both touched on this, and communications in different ways. Communications are probably one of the biggest challenges in any disaster, in any emergency, in any kind of a big thing that happens. The first thing everybody needs to know is WTF, what just happened? And the second thing they need to know is what to do about it. Okay, there was a big explosion somewhere, or there was a big rainstorm, or there was, the heat suddenly cut out, or whatever. Okay, well, that's what happened. And that's called situational awareness. That's the term for that, situational awareness, knowing what's going on. And I'm going to get back to you, Scoop. Don't worry. And then the second thing is, okay, well, now what do I need to know about it? What do I need to do about this situation, this circumstance? And when there's a big disaster, like some kind of a really big emergency disaster kind of a thing, there is absolutely not going to be enough firemen or fire people to put out the fires. There's not going to be enough law enforcement people to put out the messages to get, evacuated from certain areas. There absolutely is not enough official first responders, not enough ambulances to care for everybody that's going on. So the place for ham radio, one of the places, many places for ham radio, is to assist with the communications. And it's, for instance, going out with CERT groups and doing a windshield damage assessment. What's going on in my neighborhood, in my bigger neighborhood? Are there any big fires going on? Are there any sinkholes? Are there any mass casualty incidents? Or what's going on in my neighborhood? And then to relay that back to a CERT headquarters, the CERT Incident Command Post it's called. And then if there's life-threatening situations, the ham radio operators not only can work from the field to the incident command posts, but they can also work a level up to say, hey, we have life-threatening situations in these 5 areas which have been reported. And this is what needs to be done. These are the situations. This is, 20 people fell into a sinkhole or whatever. This is the situation that has occurred. And briefly, this is the situation and who's responding to this and what they're doing. And then the incident command above that, the people who are in charge, whether they're official first responders or CERT level, whatever, then they can pass that life-threatening situation up a level where they can make decisions about what's the biggest life-threatening situation we face and how to respond to that first. So ham radio operators can be in the field correspondents to the points of control, and they can also reach out beyond. If somebody gets lost, we do a lot of public service events with like public health and safety requirements with races and such, Oakland marathons and those kind of things, bike races, a lot of those. And we can pass the message on. Well, somebody's kid wandered off when they were turning a corner and they looked around and the kid was gone, or the dog is gone, or, the bike has a flat tire and the person now is stuck out in the middle of nowhere. Then we can radio in and say, we need a car to come and pick these people up, or we need a little search team to go find this person's missing kid, or whatever it is, those situations that happen. When there's big events, things do happen. And so we can radio in what happens in those situations and then advise the people what there is going to be to do about it.
I have to say that I'm going to be eternally grateful to all the ham radio operators in Central Texas. When we had the 2021 meltdown of electricity and everything else,
or freeze up.
Yeah. And we had no internet, no power, no heat. And we were, huddling in our house. And I remembered my battery powered scanner. And I went and I got my initial information from some ham radio operators who were out there, filling in, because a lot of people, they didn't have their internet. They didn't, a lot of the radio stations were not getting across. A lot of people don't have battery operated radios.
That's right.
Fortunately do. And that was a great thing that they were doing.
Yeah, there's different levels of radios depending on how much you want to get into it. But you can go up to the local Walmart or Target or whatever and get yourself an FRS GMRS radio. FRS is Family Radio Service. You can usually get a couple of them for not very much money, and they don't go very far. They're not very powerful. But if you're somewhere else in the neighborhood and something happens, you can call into like your home and say, I'm okay, and I'm on my way home with this radio. Not very powerful, doesn't go very far, but the ham radio is, you study for the license, you get the license, and then you can call in for much greater distances. And in fact, some ham radio operators have contesting where they try and reach other people all around the world. So with the right setup, you can really reach a long distance, but you don't have to spend, that much time and money on staying in touch with everyone.
Yeah, I have one right here.
Scoop, go scoop.
My wife is disabled, and she's on the other side of the house, and we stay in communication. If I'm doing something in here and she needs something, got the radio, and I have tons of them. I have way too many devices anyway. That's an addiction that I have to address.
See, I think there's even some kind of a little, basic radio thing on your phone, if your phone is working, which in a big disaster it won't be, but you can practice like holding down the talk button.
Yeah, there's so much that we take for granted that we're just used to having, and in the particular like snowpocalypse that we had here, many people were without electricity, but they were also without water.
Yes.
And without electricity, well, the cell towers were still working. So long as you could keep your iPhone charged or your phone charged, your smart device, you could maintain some contact and get some information through that particular device. But that wasn't really sustainable. And the electricity took, in some cases, I think weeks to come back for some people. Yeah, it came back pretty quickly for us, but it was much longer for some people. And the water was out for a really long time. And that's something that I never would have imagined, that we would lose both electricity and water at the same time. And I feel that I was pretty naive and innocent before then, and definitely unprepared.
Yes. Well, we don't know what's going to happen, and so this gets into some of the basics that I want everybody to remember about this, or to learn about this. One thing is, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, get your alerts, sign up for alerts, so that if there is a message coming over the phone and your phone is still working, then great. The cell towers may be working for a day or two, maybe two after something happens, but then their backup batteries go out, and you won't have cell phones either. So then you won't have electricity or water or cell phones.
Yeah, the
So
cell phones here in Bastrop County, a lot of the cell towers went down. We had, our cell phones were just basic paperweights because we couldn't get anything done with them. And after the batteries have been sucked dry from no electricity to charge with, then they're definitely a paperweight.
yeah. Well, and it's relatively cheap and easy to get yourself a backup battery that'll help with just your phones. Get a battery that's good enough for your phones, and then you'll at least have a few extra hours.
Yeah, I've invested in what I call a power brick, and it charges by a USB cable, but it holds an enormous amount of power, and you could plug your phone in to do it, and you could use it as a light. And if you have no flashlight, you can. So I carry these things around. I have a ton of them. So I just keep sucking the power out of one and then grab another one.
Yeah. Scoop, that raises an interesting situation, which is that batteries do die after a while, and a lot of people are of the mind that, well, I don't need one today, so therefore I'm not going to need one at all. And if I buy one today, then I won't need it for all the time that it's good, and then all of a sudden it'll be bad, and I'll need it, and it won't be there anymore. Well, yeah, that's a possibility, but since we don't know what's going on, we kind of have to make a plan for how things work. How things might work. So, get a battery backup. Like, you got a bunch of battery backups, you'll probably keep a few more devices online for as long as you need them, until you can connect with somebody else, who knows. And battery backups aren't that expensive. You can get, little ones and the connectors for them for your phones and whatever other devices you think are important for you.
Yeah, another thing, the weather radios that you can get, they're not very expensive, and they pick
Yes.
up the weather stations, but they also most of them also pick up AM and FM radio, and that turned out to be our only entertainment deal once we some of the stations in Austin finally got back up. Is we were sitting there listening to the music on the weather radio, because other than that we'd have to sing to each other, and that wasn't going to work. But
Yeah,
but you definitely should have the weather radio, because that's one thing that especially during tornado season, that you really need to have on and pay attention to.
you do. And a lot of, interestingly, and this is a sign of the times, a lot of AM radio stations have good backup systems. So they'll keep broadcasting even when you've lost power. But
Hmm.
who's got an AM radio these days? Unless you, go out and get a battery backup radio, and then all of a sudden you'll have access to a lot of news about what's actually going on, and where to find the shelters, and where to find water, points of distribution for water, and those kind of things. AM is still out there.
Yeah, I started out working in AM radio, and John and I grew up in the same town in West Texas, and I didn't think anyone would listen, but we got an emergency broadcast system notification that a tornado was headed toward our town, and I got on the radio and started reading off all the notifications we were receiving over the AP wire service and from the sheriff's office. And the next day, I was deluged by people being thankful for, having someone telling them what's going on, because in those days there wasn't a lot of ways to find out other than on your local radio.
I think that was the tornado that jumped over my house.
Probably was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing too, Scoop, because these days, information, like I said, it's hard to get. It's good information is hard to come by, and it's still the case, even with our cell phones and with the internet and everything else. If those things go away, how do you find the information? You won't get it from the alert service either.
Yeah,
Well, one question I have is kind of a question of authority. Like in a disaster, in an emergency, somebody kind of has to take charge. And the current thing is you have a lot of people now who resist authority. For instance, anti-vaxxers resisting public health, that sort of thing. I wonder if that's complicating emergency management.
It could be. It certainly would be for the people who are emergency responders. Let me say two things about that. One is the incident command system, which is a very top-down organization, but it runs efficiently, and it's the model that the government uses from the federal, state, county, regional, county, city level, and also CERT teaches this incident command system. And it's basically there's one person at the top of these little many triangles. And the one person at the top gets all the information coordinated up, and they get to make the decisions locally, and they coordinate with the level up above them, which would be the city or the county. The county, when they get overwhelmed, they go up one level to the bigger county or the region, and they go up one level when they get overwhelmed. So there is this triangle sort of hierarchy of what's going on, and if there are people who don't want to really coordinate with this system, they're not going to be very effective. They're just going to be off doing stuff, and that's going to be complicating everything that's going on, complicating any response effort. The other thing is in a fire or in a situation where there's an evacuation that's necessary, there will often be people who there's people who are not ready for an evacuation, and the first thing they'll do is walk around the house in circles and say, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do? And then they'll start calling their neighbors, what do I do, what do I do? And then their neighbors go, what do I do, what do I do? And then they'll start, and it goes on from there. They may or may not evacuate themselves very well, but there will almost always be people who, no, I'm not evacuating, I'm going to stay and I'm going to fight for my house or whatever. And I don't know if those are if there's a Venn diagram where there's overlap of the people who just resist authority generally and people who want to stay home and evacuate and not evacuate and save their house from whatever comes. But there will always be a challenge to the people who want to do the best thing for you, whatever that is. So it's always a matter of interpretation. Yes.
What is your opinion of FEMA? There are many people who love it because they were helped by it, but it had kind of a spotty history, especially back in Katrina.
That's a complicated question for me, trying to be in this area, which is supported by FEMA. I think a lot of people with FEMA do a really outstanding job. They have a lot of good experience in dealing with different kinds of emergencies. They plan ahead and they try and think through, what do we do in case this happens or that happens? A lot of the people their hearts are in the right place and their minds are in the right place and their work is focused on doing the right thing. That said, you get like Good Job Brownie, and you get situations where the people in charge, the people at the top, don't really have experience, don't really know what they're doing, they don't belong at the top of that many decisions, that much impact to the people that are being hurt by some situation or affected by it. And so it's pretty much like any situation, you got to have the right people in the right place and the right power. And FEMA hasn't always had that situation. It's, kind of hard to argue with that. They haven't always had the right people at the top. But I think that overall, FEMA is really trying to do the right thing. They're organized well. They've got a lot of people with their hearts in the right place, and they're there for the right purpose.
Speaking of government, we were mentioning this earlier. There's the website called ready.gov, which is all about disaster preparedness. What do you think of this site? Is it helpful?
It is. There's a whole lot of the starting with make a plan. That is something that everybody should go and follow those directions. Plan ahead, build a kit, do some low cost, no cost preparedness. That is stuff that people should make as homework. Do one of those things every month. or every week, something. The government is mostly ready for emergencies overall that they're familiar with. So, we've had a few tornadoes, we've had a few floods, we've had, some things that we've had experience with. And so they're prepared for they've got the forms and they've got the processes down for things that repeat. But every disaster is unique. And we might think that we have a toxic oil spill, and there will be people with hazmat suits ready to tackle the immediate problem, and police ready to evacuate the neighborhoods, and public information officers ready to relay the correct and prevailing, correct information, and to steer the prevailing commentary in the factually correct direction. And they're to the best of their capability, they're going to try and do the right thing. But when it's our neighborhoods that are quarantined because of a toxic spill, or our house that gets red tagged for whatever reason, our house is sliding down the hill, with the landslide. When it's our stuff, we're not really prepared for that, and FEMA can't prepare us for that. So we kind of have to do the best we can as well. So, and there's another thing too. When someone doesn't have insurance, or when the insurance doesn't cover the damage that's done, then FEMA steps in and sort of looks at the situation and verifies that this damage was done, and tries to give a way to make people whole in some definition of whole. So if you don't have insurance, or if your insurance company doesn't cover the amount of damage, then they'll put you in the system and they'll verify the damage and the coverage and everything, and then they'll send you to the state and the county for the resources that the state and county can help you with, whether it's loans, grants, whatever. We'll sort of put you into the bigger bandage and see if we can't help bring you back to some version of normal. Best efforts.
Yeah, the whole idea of emergency preparedness. Yeah, I was living in the Bay Area for 40 years. Even though I started out in Texas, I went there for work and found out that I wasn't nearly as prepared as I thought I was when we had the 1989 earthquake.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm prepared. I was a Boy Scout. I've got my scout knife and some food in the house. I was not prepared, and there was no one coming to help me for a while. And since then, I've always had numerous go bags and stockpiles of stuff, just because I don't want to be in that position again. And people really should look at their pantry and see if it's something that's going to keep you alive for a while.
That's a really important point, Scoop. There's the go bags and there's stay bags. If you have, if there's a toxic fume outside, or, really bad smoke from a wildfire, or something that's going to keep you inside, you may be inside for a couple of days. So you probably want a gallon of water per person, per day, and per pet in your cabinets somewhere, stored somewhere inside, because you can't live without water. That's the number one most important thing. You can live without food for a few days, but it'd be nice if you had some food that you don't have to cook. So, some snacky kind of things, or stuff that you didn't mind eating, straight out of the can or whatever. And the ready.gov does give you some good guidance on where you can find, the stuff that it doesn't have to cost you a bundle. Just go to the store and buy 2 things for your go bag every week, or every grocery shopping, get one more thing for your go bag and put it in your go bag. And when your go bag starts to get stale, your snacky bars or whatever start to be in there for 3 months, then take them out and eat them and put a new one in there.
Vienna sausages.
Anything that's going to keep you alive.
And money, I forgot about money in mine, and I realized that when someone said they were going to go down to the ATMs. Well, the ATMs are not working. The banks have closed, and after that, I kept money in a little hiding place.
Yeah, we're so used to using our credit cards for things that you forget how valuable ones, fives, and tens can be. And in an emergency, that may be the only thing you can spend. Ones, fives, tens, some, a roll of quarters. The stores will be so happy to see you because you'll have the ones, fives, and tens that they need.
Yeah.
Hey,
I had a question to turn around to you guys.
okay.
You asked me about ready.gov. How good a resource is the state government if it allows power companies to fail during the coldest part of the winter? And how prepared do you think your residents are? This is not a new thing, but you got hit by it again this year.
Our residents are better prepared than they were, or more of them are prepared than there were, because they've actually lived through something, that brought it right to the fore. However, we definitely still have a problem with our electric grid. It's not fixed. We are somewhat isolated here because we have a statewide electric grid that is not connected to the other electric grids in the U.S. that could potentially provide some support if ours was out. And from what I've been able to gather, the legislature and the PUC, Public Utility Commission, and ERCOT have all been kind of slow to move on fixing the problems that caused the collapse before. That said, we've had a couple of cold snaps that were pretty serious since then. Certainly not as bad as that particular one, but we haven't seen a huge number of outages. There were quite a few outages in this most recent ice storm that we had. But the biggest disaster there was that the trees started falling apart.
Yeah, the elephant in the room on that is the gas supply. Natural gas has not been remediated. They didn't do a lot of remediation of our winterization. They were given a list of things. Oh, you've got to winterize. But there's nobody going out and saying, well, show me your winterization. Not that I know of. So, that's a real weakness, and that needs to be fixed as long as they were using, natural gas to, create power.
Yeah. I do think that the politicians know that if we have another disaster like the one that we experienced actually 2 years ago today, that they're going to be in deep, deep trouble.
The two things about that. One is that the utilities are probably one of the most affected things that'll happen in, let's say, an earthquake or something that, jars the ground, because all the utilities in the ground are older most of it is older infrastructure and not really, who's taking care of this stuff. A lot of the grid is older infrastructure too, and the grid drivers, the software that does that, is a lot of that is also old and subject to hacking, as we've seen in the news recently.
The matter of burying the utilities came up just recently, and I actually am fortunate to live in an area that has buried utilities, and we had no problem with our power or our connectivity going away like a lot of neighborhoods did.
Yeah, same here.
The problem with that is they've said it's really expensive to retrofit that kind of thing.
But yeah, it's really expensive. So whose cost is that? You're paying either way. Mm-hmm. There's a funny thing that happens in emergency preparedness generally, and the number gets tossed around a little bit, but generally preparing for an emergency costs $1 and responding to an emergency costs 11. So, you want to wait until something goes wrong?
Yeah, I'm afraid that many people would answer yes to that.
Yeah, well, that's a decision. And that's politics. That's
basically. Or they would answer no and think yes,
Yeah. But I mean, 1 to 11. Come on, how hard is that?
Yeah. I do think that there's been some improvement here. I can't imagine that there hasn't been, but it's just not enough. And we've had other problems. We've had some failures just here within the city of Austin. We had a water outage that lasted for several days. People were on boil water notice for probably 4 days or so, 4 or 5 days. And each time something like that happens, it undermines confidence the in the authorities and also just in the infrastructure itself.
Yeah.
Well,
And it doesn't help, and it may drive preparedness. I mean, people may become so concerned that things are going to blow up or melt down that they'll start to prepare more effectively than they did before.
you talk about infrastructure. Your Texas infrastructure, a lot of it is really old, and that goes with in fact, everywhere. A lot of the piping is still lead that's down there. A lot of the sewage pipes are really old and are constantly failing. The water system. We always have these, tsunamis that erupt in the middle of the city when a water main breaks, and there's just a lot of really ancient infrastructure that no one seems to want to deal with.
Well, and there's another side to that. This isn't exactly directly related to disaster preparedness, but water is a finite resource. And in a city like Austin in particular has been growing leaps and bounds over the years. And I don't think anybody's really paid sufficient attention to the question of where we're going to get water as we have more and more people using it,
Yeah, that is one of the big planning questions of cities is, do we have enough resources to actually service the new population that developers want? And if developers come in with a big bag of cash, there's a lot of cities out there that'll basically say, oh, well, okay, we'll just overlook the fact that we've only got, this much water and you don't, and you're out in the middle of the desert building these, giant homes with green grass lawns on them. Oh, whatever. Planning ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely going to be an issue here as we continue to grow and as the water tables continue to shrink.
Yeah, there was a big dispute between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas just recently about the Colorado River, the usage of that water, and it's almost like they were ready to declare war on each other because every state, the farmers and the industrial companies want more and more water, and the people, they want to have their water, but there's only a finite amount of that stuff, and it's just strange to see, all these people saying, well, I don't care about you, I just want it for my people, and that they've got to move past that if we're going to survive.
Scoop, that's an interesting point because historically water rights have split more or less, I think it's Mississippi River, so that on the East Coast, the water rights tend to be you got to share it with your neighbors. But west of the Mississippi, the problem tends to be whoever gets it first gets it. And so if the farmers get it, and they get the allotment first, then, what's to stop them from, that's why we have the Colorado River in the situation that it's in, is because it got used up in the Delta or got used up, in agriculture somewhere earlier up the line before it got down to the people who, don't get it anymore.
See, and this is what worries me in all of this political craziness and chaos that we see now. I see people who are involved in governance who do not have their eye on the ball. All they're focused on is getting elected, getting reelected,
John,
fighting the members of the other party. They're not really doing public service.
Well, yeah, the sign of the times. This is really where politics is at the moment.
Yeah. And what is almost certainly happening now is that things are kind of crumbling because nobody's got their eye on the ball. People are not taking care of the infrastructure. They're not taking care of the supply chains. We saw this supply chain disruption recently, and I can't help but think that's because whatever supply chain management existed had broken down somewhat.
Yeah.
And that's another kind of disaster, you know?
Anything that impacts our lives in a really large a large way is going to be a disaster. It just depends on how you define, some level of disaster. If it affects us in a big deal, it's a disaster for us.
Well, Judy, people listening to this may be thinking, well, I'm not prepared at all. Can you give a basic primer on basic preparedness? What should you have and what should you not even waste your time on when you're doing a preparedness plan?
Thank you, Steve. I think one thing is, sign up for alerts. Get alerts so that if there's a chance that you know what's going on, you can react accordingly. The second thing is to make a plan to protect your people. Make a plan for your family. If it's a fire in the house, where do you get out? Where are the exits? Can we make a plan to meet outside at whatever tree or whatever street? If something happens and we get separated, where do we meet? Who do we call out of state to let us know, let each of us know what's going on? Some way of communicating our readiness or our okayness with the rest of our family. Make a go bag. A go bag might have a basic first aid kit because somebody's going to get a cut or a bruise. It might have emergency contact list that's actually printed because our phones may or may not work, but we may still be able to get a hold of people. Have your personal documents in a watertight bag or somewhere in the cloud. That's one that people don't usually think of, but the title to your home, complete PIA to replace something like that. Water, I mentioned water earlier. Make sure you have 1 gallon per person per day and per pet. You're going to need to drink, you're going to need to wash, you're going to need to be tidy, healthy with your body. So that's very important. And make sure you have that much for at least 3 days. I would suggest 10. If you're really thinking about it, 2 weeks of water isn't unreasonable. A 3-day supply of non-perishable food and a can opener. And if you can, if you have a little cook stove or something, a way to cook it, that would be handy too. Scoop, you mentioned, and I'm going to flag you on this one, a battery powered or a hand crank radio and some extra batteries. Thank you for that. Flashlight, always helpful to have a flashlight to see what's going on. A small personal hygiene kit, a little extra toothbrush, a little extra, travel shampoo or travel soap, whatever those kind of things are, is always good. A very small tool kit. You never know when you're going to need a little screwdriver, a little it doesn't have to be big. It just has to be something that will help you, get out of a jam. Extra phone charger and extra batteries is always good for your phone. An extra coat. If it's cold weather, put an extra coat in there, extra sweater, or a change of clothes. Put some clean socks and underwear in there because at the minimum, you're going to need an extra layer if it's cold outside and all of a sudden you don't have enough heat. And as you mentioned, Scoop, once more, tagging you on this one, some extra cash, small bills and change. Put a little, baggie of small bills and change in your go bag. Also, I want to mention a go bag for pets. People don't often think of pets, but everybody that has a pet is going to go, oh my gosh, I forgot my pet. Also in the go bag, put like a week's worth of your medicines in there. If you take any kind of medicines, vitamins, whatever it is that you take that you want to not live without, and put a week's worth of those in, and be sure to trade those out every now and then. But getting back to the pets, get a pet carrier with the name of your pet, your phone number, and a brief description of your pet, a photo is always good. A picture of you and your pet, so that in case you get separated, it'll be easier to match you up with your pet. It's good if your pet has a collar and a leash, even cats, with an ID tag and a phone number. A pet muzzle is always good. You don't know sometimes if you get evacuated and you need to go to a shelter, you're going to need a pet muzzle. Picture of your pet is always good. Pet food, a 3 to 5 day supply, a 3 to 7 day supply of food, and an extra dish so that you can not have to use your hands or whatever. A copy of the pet's immunization records is always very good. Put it in a watertight baggie with whatever medicines your pet is taking. And a few treats and toys, because even your kids need a few treats and toys. over the course of the long haul.
I'm trying to picture myself trying to muzzle my cat.
Well, cats don't muzzle, but they do. They do a pet carrier.
Yeah. One other thing that I found was essential to have in your go or your stay bag. When we had the 1991 Oakland Hills fire, which destroyed thousands of homes, I was right in the middle of that. And I saw it coming over the hill, and I thought we were going to be burned out. And
Yeah.
my wife and I started loading up our vehicles with all the stuff that's important papers and whatever we could think of. And she mentioned we're going to need something in case we're stuck somewhere for entertainment. We need to bring something that means something to it. She brought her sewing machine. I brought my computer.
There you
And
go.
it's like, okay, maybe that's not in everybody's go bag, but that was our go bag because I could see me being stuck somewhere without my computer. I'd just be a basket case.
But
Yeah.
that assumes you can plug it in somewhere.
Well, if you're heading out of town, if you get the evacuation notice and you just grab your go bag, then you've got the minimal, and then you grab your computer and you're set to go.
Yep.
So you mentioned earlier this kind of vision of people kind of wandering around what to do when they're being evacuated. Are there additional things that you should consider if an evacuation is possible?
Yeah, the most important thing is if you get a notice that you need to be evacuated, you only have 2 or 3 minutes to get out of town, to get out of the way. You don't have, it's not like, they're giving you 15 minutes notice. No, they're basically saying, we can't avoid this. The fire's coming down the hill. This house is in danger. Let's get these people out of here. And so if you get an evacuation notice, do not wander around your house saying, is this real? What do I do? What do I take? I'm going to lose everything. I can't, whatever. Do not do that. Just, grab whatever's important to you. Grab your pets, grab your go bag if you've got one. Good for you if you do. Get in the car and get out of the way. That's the most important thing is if you get an evacuation notice, you do not have time to dither. Get out of the way. Just go. Get in your car and start going places. You'll have police on the road trying to get you out of town into a safe place. Just go.
Yeah, they have pretty massive evacuations sometimes when we have hurricanes on the coast here, anywhere that they have hurricanes. And one of the problems with those evacuations is traffic control. It's
Yes.
just hard to get people out. So
Well,
it seems to me that it would be best to leave as quickly as you can.
Yes. Yeah.
The problem is most people say, well, I'm going to wait and see what's happening. And then when it gets really funky, everybody leaves at the same time. And that's when you have the travel meltdowns on the highways.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah. That's why when you get an evacuation notice, you really do need to grab and go. Just get out of there. Get out of the way of the traffic. Get out of the way of the storms, whatever, the fire, whatever it is.
One thing
Go ahead.
John.
Go ahead.
One thing I've talked about before is people in an emergency can tend to step up and do the right thing. I experienced that during the earthquake in 1989. Everybody's phone were out. I mean, you couldn't get a phone call, but for some reason my phone was active. I got a dial tone, and of course I went online immediately and got onto one of the online services, the Genie online service. And there were all sorts of people. There were people forming helplines or help chat groups there to help people get out a message to their family, to their friends, to their children that aren't in the Bay Area. And I started doing that. And I had guys say, hey, I'm in Texas. You're from Texas. Anyone you want me to call? And I gave them my mother's phone number. And a couple of days later, she called me and said, who is this guy that's calling saying that you're not dead? I would have known if you were dead. It's like, no, that's just some computer folks that are taking care of getting out, people's, status to their families. And I did that for a lot of people, and it was amazing how many folks were stepping up. They could have been out trying to work on their own problems, but they got online and tried to, step up and help people.
This gets right back to where we started, and John's very important work with the tsunami groups and with the Katrina. Katrina was amazing. Mm-hmm. Katrina was like so chaotic, and all the people that were doing background tasks, which were trying to get the communication going, helping people learn where the shelters were, helping people connect with each other, tracking people, just keeping track of what was going on, because who could track you if you decide to go left or right?
Yeah, and there's usually various organizations, agencies involved in something like that, and it's important for them to figure out how to coordinate with each other. And that was actually part of the problem after Katrina, was getting the coordination done. And part of the problem of coordination was that people were so focused on what they were doing in their specific realm that they didn't really have time to think about how to coordinate or connect with another group or agency.
Right. Yeah. And there are channels for connecting, but as I mentioned a couple of times, coordination of communications is sometimes the most challenging thing. So, have a plan, make a plan for how you're going to coordinate and communicate with your own family. Start there.
We're getting close to the end. The one other thing I was going to bring up, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but this thing that happened in Ohio the other day, the train derailment. Did you pay any attention to that? Have you got any thoughts about that kind of emergency?
It's another infrastructure moment in some ways. Do we have the emergency response to deal with some of the catastrophic failures that we have in our system? The short answer is, yeah, kind of. And the longer answer is calling FEMA.
Well, I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. This has been a great discussion, and now you got my wheels turning. I'm thinking about all the things I have to do.
I have to go buy some batteries.
Lots of batteries.
That's the worst thing that happens. You're in good shape.
My wife started buying 5-gallon jugs of water and piling them up out in the garage after that last emergency.
That's smart.
And it's time to rotate those things now.
Yeah. So one quick thing: don't put plastic jugs of water on directly on your cement floors. Put a piece of wood underneath. There's some chemical. I don't know much about this, but there's some chemical reaction that happens between cement and plastic.
Oh, interesting.
It makes those bottom jugs of water not as good as the top jugs of water. So just put, cardboard, newspaper, or something that takes the cement away from the plastic.
Well, there's some really useful information, because I'm guilty of that. I have to go get a piece of wood now.
We got a lot of canned food out there too, that we got kind of to have food for an emergency. But yeah, I realized that there's this whole question of kind of coordinating the kinds of foods that you get to make sure that you're getting adequate nutrition. Certainly beans are probably a staple. They're easy to find in cans.
Make sure you have a can opener. I didn't have one in my first go bag, and they're like, "Oh, you got all this canned food. How are you going to get it open, Skippy?"
Yeah, that's an important one. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Judi, for joining us. This has been great.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Scoop. It's been a fascinating conversation.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lipkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.